We are what we build, folks. It's very interesting when you think about it. We are what we build. Going back to the early settlements and on the eastern seaboard in the early 1600s, the houses that people lived in were a direct reflection of their cultural values. And in New England, they were primarily English. In the middle Atlantic states, we had a Central European influence, Germans, Quakers, a variety of religious groups, the Amish, as well as the Mennonites, etc. And in the South, we had, again, an aristocratic class that were English, but were very different from the Puritans that settled in New England. And so those values became the structure, if you will, or the framework for the buildings that they built. So one way to look at building is who's the builder and what materials are available. A second way to think about building is what other values are reflected in the buildings. And when we look at the development of building styles in the 17th and 18th and 19th century, we can see an evolution based on our own country's history. In New England, the center chimney, whether it's a small cape, a salt box, or a two-story colonial, the center chimney was important for heat, and it was an adaptation to a climate that was less than hospitable about 6 months of the year. As the country developed, we began to see Georgian architecture. That architecture was based on King George. This is before the American Revolution. It had a simplicity, but it was a reflection of what was taking place again in England. When the Revolution occurred, we had an interesting shift in terms of architectural styles, particularly for public buildings. And we began to see a federal style based on the new federal government, and then very quickly, Greek revival. Because what had just happened? We had just formed a new country based on a democratic ideal. And those ideals emanated from Greek and Roman history, and hence our architectural plans look like columns, triangles, we have plinths, etc. We have a classical look to early American buildings, and particularly in the city of Washington City at the time. As we moved west, and as our country grew, we built buildings that were called vernacular, and a vernacular building was a building that simply meant whatever was available, whether it was stone, whether it was oak, whether it was pine, whether it, in the case of prairie homes, literally great wads of grass, all of that reflected what we were able to build given the local resources. That's called vernacular housing. So when students begin to analyze and better understand housing styles, they're learning about their national values as well as their local values, particularly with respect to vernacular homes. Go build a house.